U.S. President Donald Trump says tariffs are coming for imported semiconductors.
And it'll happen very fast. It'll all happen very fast.
Do you know what rate the semiconductor tariff?
I'm going to be announcing it over the next week.
Can you?
So semiconductors, we know, are essential to the computing ability of countless products, cars, electronics, and the industry around them adds billions to our economy every year. So how will tariffs impact this vital Canadian industry? Joining us this morning from Ottawa is Laurent Carbonneau. He's the Director of Policy and Research at the Council of Canadian Innovators. Welcome to your morning.
Hi, Anne-Marie. Great to be here.
Listen, one of the things that we've discovered around tariffs is that we're learning so much about the industries that contribute to our economy and make things work. So first of all, maybe set up for us, how important are semiconductors to industry as a whole, to us here in Canada?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of people will probably remember back in 2020, during the early days of the pandemic, we had basically the auto industry shut down more or less overnight for a couple of weeks, largely because we couldn't get in chips from Taiwan. So, having these kind of abrupt shortages, it can be, hugely impactful. And much like the auto industry, our supply chain and value chain with the U.S. In semiconductors is pretty tightly integrated. So, of course, we don't know exactly what this will look like yet. And then, with Donald Trump's tariffs policies, it's kind of, if you don't like it, wait 5 minutes and you'll find out what it might be next. But it would be a pretty serious problem for us, and certainly for companies on both sides of the border who rely on these kind of integrated supply chains.
Well, you were talking about the stall that happened in the industry with the imports, and Canada since has been working to expand our semiconductor industry. Last summer, in July, the federal government invested $120 million in a project that would, in part, create a pan-Canadian network that would support the design and manufacturing of semiconductors here. So then, let's take a look ahead to U.S. tariffs. How would they impact Canadian jobs and firms in this industry?
Yeah, it's hard to say, right, because we don't know what the rates will be, but I think it's really worth noting that during the last American administration, the U.S. passed this $200 billion Chips and Science Act, which, our efforts were really piggybacking on in terms of building a more robust North American supply chain. So no one has really planned for a situation where the U.S. is fully going it alone, right? The idea was very much that we would have this kind of North American integration with parts of it on both sides of the border. And I think the challenge for Canada was always, how do we make sure that Canada does well out of this? Semiconductors are an industry where you have a lot of the value concentrated in the chip design parts of the industry, where people are creating the IP, and then not so much in other parts. That's kind of changing a little bit with advanced semiconductors, where there's a lot of value being added in the packaging, which is actually an area where we're pretty strong. But that was kind of the big challenge for us, was how do we sort of get our place in the sun in this industry? And now, we might be looking at a very different challenge of how do we kind of weather this very abrupt storm that we don't even really know the shape of yet. The 120,000 jobs across the country in this industry is serious.
Well, speaking of that, there is a lot of back and forth, right? So what kind of risk then does this uncertainty put Canada in?
Yeah, and if you zoom out, right, that's really the big problem with these tariffs to some extent. We can kind of survive, certain tariff rates, not like the 145 placed on China or something, but, at 10% would be survivable for a lot of industries. But it's really uncertainty that's killing us, right? And especially for these very critical and high-tech industries, where you're really talking about long-term bets on stability, right? This just doesn't work otherwise. And in fact, the U.S. is kind of, as I mentioned, with the CHIPS Act, has kind of blown up its own plan in some very real ways, because now, who knows what they can really count on when we're talking about these really, really big investments. When TSMC invested in Arizona, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars. So having these kinds of investments being taken off the table because of the risk of uncertainty, really, really serious.
The U.S. administration and President Trump claims that this has something to do with its national security, wanting semiconductors not coming in from other countries. Is there any risk for Canada?
There definitely could be, in the sense that if people are pausing shipments or slowing down shipments to the U.S., that we would, kind of have the same issue. I think it's really worth remembering, though, once again, there was kind of a way to address this kind of national security challenge of being overly reliant on Taiwan and South Korea. And it was, reshoring manufacturing, but not doing so via these really disruptive and kind of arbitrary tariffs. And that's very much what Canada and the U.S. were kind of working on, pretty much jointly. From the point of view of Council of Canadian Innovators, our point of view is always that, Canada should be trying to get the, more of the high value parts of the sector, more design, more of the advanced packaging, and not really leaving ourselves open as much to this kind of arbitrary policy that is not really going to do much for the industry in the long run.
Director of Policy and Research at the Council of Canadian Innovators, Laurent Carbonneau, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.